Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to move this motion. I'm just going to speak briefly to it so we can all have a say on this motion and get it to a vote. Mr. Chair, we finally got the documents relating to the Winnipeg Lab. My view is that this is the start of the matter, not the end. The collection of evidence is usually the start of a process, not the completion of it. And so really we're leaving off where we left 3 years ago when the Canada-China Committee in the previous Parliament asked for the Winnipeg Lab documents. I believe strongly that the committee is the right place to examine these documents, the right place to hold the government accountable, and the right place for us to hear from witnesses and to produce a report with recommendations. Mr. Chair, this is a grave and serious matter, as CSIS highlighted in its intelligence and assessment it's submitted to the Public Health Agency of Canada, which are contained, an assessment which is contained in the documents we received. It's a grave and serious matter because a government scientist clandestinely collaborated with the government and the military of the People's Republic of China and was paid clandestinely by the government and the military of the People's Republic of China without the government of Canada knowing. And so these serious national security breaches, I believe, warrant examination by a parliamentary committee. It's now been 4 weeks since we received the documents, which is the reason, Mr. Chair, as you know, I've called this emergency meeting so that we can make a decision, I hope, in favor of holding hearings on these documents. It took us 3 years to get the documents. It's now taken us 4 weeks for us to have a discussion about whether or not a committee should look at these documents. I think we should have done that almost immediately upon receiving the documents. So the motion in front of us will allow us to examine these serious national security breaches. It will allow us to examine the flow of information and intelligence within the government of Canada and to get answers to questions such as the following. Why wasn't this caught earlier than September 2018? Why did it take 10 months for the government to secure the lab? When the first red flag went up, according to the documents, the first red flag went up in September of 2018 when a patent was discovered to have been registered in the People's Republic of China, which is contrary to government policy and contrary to Canadian law. It then took 10 months for the lab to be secured on July 5th, 2019. In my view, an unacceptably long period of time for that to happen. We also need to examine why it took us 3 years to get the documents. The ministers indicated that it was up to public servants that made the decision on what information to release to the committee. We need to examine what is wrong with the information flow between the Government of Canada and Parliament. So that in the future, when a parliamentary committee asks for these sorts of documents, they're provided forthwith in a way that protects national security as we put in place 3 years ago and not 3 years. The motion also is to examine why the documents is also examine the flow of information within the government as it related to the most senior figures in the government, the Ministers of Health, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Prime Minister's office, to understand if the information flow within the government is working. At the end of the day, Mr. Chair, I believe we need to hold the government accountable on this. This saga started more than 3 years ago. The government defied 4 orders of the House of Commons and its committee. It took the Speaker to court, and it disposed of these 4 orders by the dissolution of Parliament, which, as you know, dissolved the 4 orders. And we cannot allow that to go unanswered and unexamined. And finally, Mr. Chair, I'll say there was a report just today in the news that a new level 4 lab is being proposed in Canada. Surely we need to study this matter at committee about the only existing level 4 lab and its security breaches before a new level 4 lab is stood up in this country that might pose security risks. So I think, I hope that members of the committee will support the motion, and I look forward to their views on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. So we'll have a speaking order, and for those on Zoom, use the raised hand function if you wish to weigh in on the matter. So we'll go back and forth on this one. We'll go next to Mr. Nakvi and then to Mr. Berthold.
Point of order. I asked for before Mr.
The chair is going to go back and forth.
Mr. Speaker, I asked
I
Mr.
recognize Mr. Nakvi.
Mr. Nakvi.
Yes. So Mr. Nakvi can go, and then you can go. You still have plenty of time.
Mr. Speaker, it's not a question of time. It's a question of opportunity. If I want to speak to, si je veux parler sur la motion de mon collègue.
If I want to speak to my colleague's motion before the party opposite moves amendments or does whatsoever, I have the right to do so, and I clearly indicated that I wish to take the floor before Mr. Nakvi. So should you deprive me of my right to speak at this juncture, or deprive me of that right concerning the motion on the table before the government party is able to table amendments that may change the pith and substance of the motion. So once again, I'd like to reiterate this. You saw me, you heard me, even our television viewers saw that I interrupted Mr. Chong calling for the floor before you acknowledged Mr. Nakvi. So I would ask that you respect the speaking order. That's a normal way that we work in committee, i.e. that you hand me the floor before my colleague. I'm sure my colleague has highly interesting things to say. That said, I'm entitled to insist, Mr. Chairperson, that I take the floor now.
The chair has the option to, to recognize people in the order that he sees them. I think that, we'll look at Mr. Nakvi and suggest that there's probably going to be amendments. So, Mr. Berthold, I take your point that you wish to support Mr. Chong's motion before we get into, into looking at amendments. So, I will give you the floor, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Hardy.
Thank you very much, sir. And I really appreciate the fact that you've acknowledged how important it is to respect the speaking order. Mr. Chairperson, as I mentioned previously, I'm rising or speaking in support of the motion moved by my colleague Michael Chong about how important it is for this committee to undertake a study on the Winnipeg Lab documents that were just released 4 weeks ago regarding the Winnipeg Lab. As my colleague indicated, the fact that we now have those documents in our possession doesn't signal the end of this matter, but rather the start. In a previous legislature, we worked very hard to obtain these documents, documents that enable us to ask the real questions, the tough questions of those persons responsible. The upshot of this is that 2 individuals were expelled from a level 4 microbiology lab in Winnipeg. That is the highest level of security lab in Canada. And it's crucial that we be able to get to the bottom of this. All the more so since we learned in the newspapers this morning that another lab 4 may become operational in short order. So we want to avoid what happened in Winnipeg, a recurrence of this at this new security level 4 lab. So we want to shed light on everything that has transpired and that has led the government to defy 4 orders of Parliament, Mr. Chairperson, regarding the production of documents. We have a Prime Minister who took the House of Commons to court, unprecedented in the history of Canada, and who went so far as to trigger an election to defy the order of Parliament to produce documents. Fast forward a couple of years and we now have those infamous documents in our possession. It's important, as my colleague's motion states, that we have an opportunity to review and study the nature of those documents and get a handle on why it took so long to obtain the documents, what those documents reveal, such that our national security has perhaps been jeopardised, Mr. Chairperson. So in the motion, it states that the committee should undertake a study of the matters revealed in the Winnipeg Lab documents, as well as broader concerns they represent in relation to Canada's national security, as well as the obstacles that I just alluded to that were encountered in obtaining these documents. I won't rehash the entire motion, Mr. Chair, but I do want to stress that there are two types of witnesses that we're calling for. Those who are invited or summoned to appear should they refuse to accept the committee's invitation to appear. Now, among the witnesses that would be invited, and were they to refuse it, to be summoned, we have the Departmental Security Officer, Public Health Agency of Canada, the Deputy Minister of Health, Dr. Stephen Lucas, the Vice President, Infectious Diseases Branch, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Donald Shepherd, the Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory Branch, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Guillaume Poliquin, the President of Public Health Agency of Canada, Heather Jeffrey, the Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, David Vigneault, and the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, Nathalie G. Drouin. Now, there's a second category. These individuals that are invited to appear at dates set by the Chair. One, the Minister of Health, the Honourable Mark Holland, I'll speak to that in a moment. The Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, the Honourable Dominique Leblanc, and other witnesses whose names shall be provided by the parties to the clerk on the basis of our discussions in relation to this matter. Of course, the committee will eventually report its findings to the House. Now, let's give our television viewers a bit of a backdrop to this situation. When the red flag was raised in September 2008, when there was a patent filed in China by one of these researchers, Dr. Chu, it took 10 months to secure the Winnipeg Lab, despite our knowledge of this. From September 2008 to November, those two researchers remained at the laboratory, and we want to...
We are here to actually discuss the motion
yeah, exactly.
and to discuss the terms on which the study is to proceed. Yeah. This is not necessarily... we're a little bit in advance of the process to get into the evidence part. I think what we're really here to do this morning is to discuss the mechanics of how we undertake this study. So whereas I'm sure you have a great depth of information to provide on the evidentiary side, I would draw your attention to the purpose of this meeting, which is to really get the motion in a position where we can go forward on the study. So it's the mechanics of the motion that we're here to discuss today, sir.
It's Monsieur le Président, c'est l'adoption.
Mr. Chair, we're talking about moving a motion to undertake a study which is crucial. It's absolutely important that Canadians understand why we're moving this motion. It's important for my colleagues to understand what has motivated this motion. And as I said, I'll be quite concise and quick. I just have a couple of minutes left, Mr. Chairperson. It took 10 months to secure the Winnipeg Lab. And Mr. Chairperson, we need to understand when the Prime Minister was informed of the situation at the Winnipeg Lab. And, of course, I referred to the Minister of Health earlier. We want to know when the Minister of Health was informed of the situation at the Winnipeg Lab to ensure that there's no recurrence of this, as I mentioned previously. There are important questions we wish to ask of the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Health Department. There's information that has been revealed that may have impinged on our national security. And Mr. Holland, the Health Minister, confirmed that he wasn't responsible for this unhelpful redaction of the Winnipeg documents, and that is why we're inviting the officials from the Public Health Agency of Canada to appear to explain why they decided to redact these documents and to prevent Canadians from having access to the documents. Minister Holland said no one at PHAC will be held responsible, and that nothing was transferred from the Winnipeg Lab to the Yuan Institute in China. We want clarification regarding those statements. So, Mr. Chairperson, as I previously stated, it's crucial that we have these documents as we now do after all the previous attempts in the previous legislature, and the onus is now on the current legislature to get to the bottom of these issues by going over these documents with a fine-tooth comb, and it's important that we have an opportunity as community members to shed light on what occurred at the Winnipeg Lab. Thank you.